And will you just let me know whenever you want me to start? Okay, I'll just hold off and give people a few minutes to join.
Yeah, let's see if we get some more people, and then I'll say something officious, and then I'll pass it on to you.
Sounds great. Thank you.
What do you think, Jennifer? Is this probably our critical mass? All right. Hi, everybody. I am Scout Calvert. I am on the Ag Data Co-op team here, and I have the pleasure today to sit in for Trenton and introduce Kristen Reed, who is going to talk to us today about the Cornell Agricultural Test Bed. Her presentation is called Data Integration to Support, oh, well, you see it there on the slide. What I have on my notes is something different. But at any rate, this is awesome. I'm so glad that you're here, Kristen, and you can take it away.
All right. Thank you, Scout. Yeah, and the title I provided was a little bit long for this slide, but the same thing essentially. So thanks for the introduction and the invitation to be here to share these two projects really with the group and how important agricultural data is to the success of both of them. So I'm Kristen Reed. I'm an assistant professor in the animal science department here at Cornell. And the work that I'm presenting is a combination of efforts, including the Ruminant Farm Systems project, which I lead, and then the Cornell Agricultural Systems Testbed, which is a new project that started earlier this year and is led by my colleague, Dr. Julio Giordano, that I collaborate closely with him on. So a lot of these slides were also co-created by Dr. Giordano. I also would like to say that the Cornell Agricultural Systems Testbed in particular is a project that's supported by the Cornell Institute for Digital Agriculture. So what is this Cornell Agricultural Systems Testbed, which I will refer to as CAST moving forward because it's a mouthful. So this is a project that was funded by one of the Farm of the Future. That's what the FOTF acronym stands for, the Farm of the Future funding calls that the USDA NIFA hosted a couple of years ago. And through this funding call, we are proposing to integrate several of the research farms through data integration and increasing the digital technologies that are available for research on these farms. And by doing so, we hope to both amplify and enhance the research that is being done at these farms, but also to make them more available as a test bed for future research and technology development. In collaboration with CIDA, which is that Cornell Institute for Digital Agriculture. And so the three farms that we are integrating include two dairy farms, which is the Cornell University Ruminant Center, Kirk, and the Cornell Teaching Barn, which is another dairy farm closer to campus, which has primarily been used for teaching to our vet students and undergraduates here, as well as the Musgrave Research Farm, which does more field crops and vegetable crops research. And so as an integrated project, the CAST project has components of research, extension, and education. I'm going to focus on the research part with a little bit allusion to extension, but I will not be touching on the education component in this talk. And so, as I'm sure you all expect, any work that involves digital agriculture requires an interdisciplinary team. And so we have partnerships across the university, including those in the College of Ag and Life Sciences, the College of Engineering, the College of Computer Science, Veterinary Medicine, Dyson, and Arts and Sciences. And then we also have a partnership with the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff for the education component. And so the overarching goals of the CAST project, I think, are probably familiar to a lot of people in this audience, which is that there are a lot of challenges facing agricultural communities, agricultural producers, that involve challenges related to increasing productivity in the face of environmental concerns, challenges with labor resources, and scarcity of general resources to support agricultural productions. And so our goals are to help support the agricultural communities in their finding solution to these some of these challenges by enabling them to leverage data-driven tools and management practices to improve their efficiency and sustainability. And so we have identified three major thrusts within the CAST project. And the first is to support innovation in technology. And so I think this falls really within basic research categories. And then using methods for data integration and increasing interoperability, bring those various data streams together in Thrust 2, and then improve the data analytics that are available to translate those data streams into information that can be used for decision support and provide more management decisions that then circle back to inform future technological advances. And so that I think spans the three types of research, from basic research and Thrust 1, applied research, and hopefully by Thrust 3, enabling our work to touch on transformational research by making it more available and applicable for adoption. In Thrust 4, we hope to collaborate with our colleagues in social sciences in particular, to help translate this information for the political and social implications. So just touching on some specifics of what we are working on in the first thrust. This is technological innovation. There are two main components. So within the field parts of our farming systems, working on precision management inputs, generating information to help support cover cropping decisions, and then an exciting research component studying the impacts of applying soil amendments like rock dust and biochar for soil carbon sequestration. And then in the animal side, focusing on our dairy farms, working on methods and technologies to improve animal management, specifically feeding and nutrition, health management, and reproductive monitoring and management. And so these slides have a lot on them, and I just kept them in because I know that they'll be posted, so you can come back to them later to read more detail about what specific types of data and research we'll be doing in these two different research areas. So this is the field crop research, and then I'm going to say a little bit more about the dairy cattle research at CAST. So My colleague, Dr. Giordano, has done a lot of work in this area of integrating various data streams related to cow behavior, cow automatic monitoring systems like Fitbits for cows, and other environmental and performance metrics to provide specific decision support tools that can help classify cows, as well as provide health and reproduction alerts. And so he's going to continue along this line of research at the CAST to add more sophistication to the data analytics that he has, as well as additional technologies for monitoring to add more data streams. For example, computer vision, air quality monitoring, more environmental temperature monitoring, as well as more sophistication on the economic decision support side. So these are just examples of the types of data streams that he's working with these wearable and non-wearable sensors. There's this like cow Fitbit, like I said, which also has analogs in the ear sensors and neck tags. And then these are the inline milk sensors that provide information about the the composition and amount of milk being produced in real time. And so here's an example of the type of data that they receive, very high frequency and detail, but that allows them to detect certain behavioral and health and reproductive events like estrus. And then again, as I said, provide decisions support for the producers or managers. And then, as I mentioned before, the second thrust would be to bring this information together. So not just animal related data, but hopefully integrating data streams from a variety of parts of the farm. And so across the different parts of the farm, we hope to bring in information about soils, yields, as well as weather data. Along with the diverse sets of animal management data that has already seen some progress in integration and useful applications. And so the general schema for the proposed data integration is probably similar to a lot of other work in these lines, collecting data from a variety of different sources, whether it's a different farm management software from a computer or directly from these wearable sensors, aggregating it, making sure that it's stored in a persistent database and a way that can be retrieved based on, sensical date and animal and location tags. And then being able to access these records so that we can apply some analytics and provide useful information that can actually be used by the decision makers. So as I mentioned, the work that Dr. Giordano has done already has made some progress. And so these are the different systems that he has already been using to aggregate to collect data from in order to aggregate the information and provide post-processing analytics that are already in application in our research farm and hoping to expand upon in the future. And so as we move forward with this work at the CAST, the hope is, or the plan is to continue to implement this data collection to develop an even larger, more robust data stream or data store from which we can implement longer term data analyses and understand long-term implications and outcomes of these practices, but also to refine these methods for data cleaning and real-time analytics. In addition to adding more data so that more data streams to provide more holistic recommendations. And so the goals of Thrust 4, as I said, collaborate with our variety of social science collaborators to assess farm the implications, the larger scale implications of this work. So of course, the economic outcomes will be first in people's minds, and especially our producer stakeholders' minds, as to how this research will benefit them. But then we have also the whole farm environmental footprinting, which will also have social and economic implications as well. And then socioeconomic impacts, thinking about how these technologies impact the workforce, management practices, and kind of future-proofing the industry. And so I'm going to touch a little bit more on this whole farm environmental health component, because this is where my work with the ruminant farm systems model comes in. And really, our goal is to create a method so that we can integrate the ruminant farm systems model, also known as RUFUS, with the real farm data that's being already integrated and stored at the CAST, so that we can use the RUFUS model to understand the environmental implications of these management practices. And so a little bit about the RUFUS model. RUFUS on its surface is a simulation model of the dairy farm production and environmental impacts. It is a way to identify ways to improve efficiency and sustainability. And our goals for the RUFUS model are for it to be used both as a research tool and as a tool to support decisions both on farm and at the industry and government level. And so with that in mind, it really makes a lot of sense that the RUFUS project become integrated with the CAST system because of this dual nature of the project's goals, both for in advancing our understanding and the basic research, but also for that applied research and transformational research. So on its surface, the RUFUS model is very similar to a lot of environmental footprinting tools that you have heard about. You might also think of it as a dairy farm video game, where you have to provide it with a series of inputs that describe the dairy farm setting. These inputs include everything from the farm weather and its environment, including the soil, to the management practices that determine management operations at all parts of the farm. And on the dairy farm, we've divided this into the 4 main components and grouped them into a modular structure. So we have the animal module, and that governs herd dynamics, diet formulation, and production. We have the manure module that includes, everything from manure collection from the pens to any treatment and storage and transportation, either off farm or to the fields. And so then that leads us to the soil and crop module that has all of the biogeochemical nutrient cycling that would happen in a field, and similar to things like the SWAT model or DayCent or Comet Farm, if you're familiar with those tools. So we have water cycling, erosion, carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen cycling, as well as crop growth. And then the crops that are harvested from the fields are stored in the feed storage module and include changes to nutrient composition of the feeds that happen during harvest, drying, ensiling, and feed out. And then finally, this biophysical simulation model happens on a daily basis and includes process-based methods for representing those nutrient changes and flows between the modules. And so it creates creates a very extensive collection of time series data that then needs to be summarized to provide information about the energy use, the economics, and the environmental impacts of those processes. And then we are building this, as I mentioned, in a modular fashion so that the model can be used either at a single farm scale, or we simulated, provide with multiple initialization files so that it can be scaled to provide information at, for example, a watershed, state, co-op, or larger scale. So the Rufus vision is to support research and sustainable decision-making in ruminant and ruminant animal production through state-of-the-art open source modeling environment that is continuously adapting as technology and scientific knowledge advances. And to achieve our vision, our mission is to build an integrated whole farm model that simulates milk, meat, and crop production and other sustainability outcomes on ruminant farms. And we also have a mission to achieve the highest standards for prediction accuracy, code structure and clarity, documentation, and accessibility. And we will do this through, of course, continuous learning and an open and inclusive work environment and platform. So to really summarize, our goals are to be interoperable, both with data management software that might provide data to initialize the model, as well as with other models that might use the model outputs. We want our model to be well documented. That will help support our goal for accessibility, as well as making it open source when we publish it on our GitHub repository. And we hope that these will not only support sustainable dairy production, but also make the project itself more sustainable. Like any good interdisciplinary project, we have a wonderful team working on this. This includes universities across the country, as well as several USDA ARS collaborators and a really active industry advisory council. So everything I'm presenting is really the collective work of a large and really dedicated group. And to give you an idea of the timeline, we started this project back in 2017. In 2019, we got our first real dedicated funding and have had some success in publications and other funding along the way. And last year, we initiated a contract with a dairy industry organization so that they are committed to using the Rufus model starting next year as their footprinting tool. And there will be 2 permanent USDA ARS scientists that will be hired in the near future to support Rufus. So we're really excited about the support and interest in the project and how it's grown over the years. And so to share a little bit more about the objectives of the integration of the Rufus project with CAST, I am going to give you a little bit of detail about especially what kinds of data we are looking to pull into the Rufus model. So from this aggregated data from the CAST system, we'll be hoping to bring in the data that's already been cleaned and aggregated, specifically to initialize the model. And for example, the specific animal records could initialize the herd population, or the feed and crop management practices could be pulled in directly through this aggregated data set. There's also an option for some of the data available through this data aggregation to replace replace data streams that we are currently predicting in the Rufus model. One good example of that would be milk yields. So while we have our own methods to predict milk production in the Rufus model, because we want to be able to simulate and do scenario comparisons in the future when we don't have milk yield records, making it possible to replace the predicted milk yields with actual milk yield will enable the Rufus model to be more applicable and representative of what actually happened on the farm. And so then by pulling in this cleaned and aggregated data streams, Rufus can then provide estimates of the environmental impacts of the farm, Cass farm in its current state, but also do some scenario comparisons to understand how any technologies that are being tested at the farm might influence the estimates of these environmental footprints over a longer period of time. And then, well, we'll begin slow and, probably do this on a, semi-annually or quarterly basis. We hope to increase the frequency of this data exchange so that we can provide more updated environmental footprints over shorter periods of time. And so to give you a little bit more detail about how we're going to achieve this, I'm going to talk about the input and output structure of the Rufus model. Building on our commitment to using industry standards, industry best practices for software development, we've really modularized the Rufus model and the input-output structure so that we have this input manager that acts as a single source of truth and has a validation process for any inputs flowing into the simulation engine, which is this biophysical model here. And these inputs can be provided in any number of theoretical farms that you'd like to simulate. And so then once the inputs are validated, they're passed to the simulation engine, and then any outputs that are desired are then passed to the output manager and filtered through some definition of the output requests that are provided. Then we can have any kind of post-processing that we'd like to either generate graphs or summary reports, as well as just store the raw output data. And so we're hoping by with this modularized system that we will be able to both pull in and return data to the Cass system efficiently. And so the Rufus model, being a process-based model, does require quite a lot of input. I think, we're north of 200 different inputs, and that can expand depending on the number of fields and diets and animal types you'd like to initialize. And this is just a high-level summary of what those what types of inputs those or input categories that those specific inputs fall into. And I'm going to focus in on the animal module because I am an animal scientist, and specifically focus in on the information that would be needed in order to collect information about specific feeding practices on dairy farms, because I think that this is an area where we could still use a lot of work, both in practice and in research. So to give you more information about the animal module in Rufus and where we could benefit from having information from real farm data streams, I'm going to give you some more detail, about the animal module. So this is a schematic of the animal module in Rufus, and we take an initial state of the animal, and that's where we represent individual animals, and so could pull in, for example, a historical herd management records. And then we also take in information about the weather, specifically to be able to represent things like heat stress and cold stress of the animals, and herd management decisions defining health and reproduction, as well as pen grouping. Those informations go into the animal life cycle module that then passes an updated daily animal state to the nutrition and production submodule. of course, you can't have a nutrition module without feed information. So this submodule also takes in any information about the specific feeds that are available, and if desired, the exact diet that would like to be fed. And then provides predictions of the production, the manure excretion, and enteric methane. This whole process happens on a daily basis and at the animal life cycle on an individual cow basis, and the nutrition and production at the pen level. And so our diet formulation methods in Rufus, we have two options. You can either use an automated diet formulation method. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but this is the overall schematic. As I said, the nutrition and production methods happen at a pen level, so as many pens as you want. Here, just generally showing we have, would typically have like a calf pen, at least one growing pen, and at least one lactating cow pen. And this diet formulation can happen as often as you want. I guess the shortest interval would be daily, and the longest interval would be whatever length of simulation. But typically we play with things that range between weekly and monthly. And the total amounts of feed that are eventually provided to the pen are scaled depending on the number of animals in the pens. But in general, the life cycle module will pass information about that updated state to an animal requirements function that will estimate the nutrient requirements of those animals. That, combined with the feed information, will go into our ration driver and attempt to find a least cost diet for that meets that set of nutrient requirements, using a nonlinear optimization method. If there is no solution, then the model will iteratively reduce either the milk production or the growth production and reattempt the formulation interval. Reattempt the diet formulation. We have a variety of user controls to put, maximum production reduction responses, as well as warnings and things that will allow the user to understand how well their diet formulation worked and what the effects of that formulation were on the production outcomes. And so for the automated diet formulation, the underlying nutrient requirement models are based on the dairy cattle nutrient requirements that are provided by the National Academies of Sciences. You can choose either the 2001 version or the more recently released 2021 version. And so these are the summary of the inputs that are required in order to calculate those nutrient requirements, including body weight, days in pregnancy, parity, calving interval, milk components, milk yield, days in milk, body condition score. And so these are all information that could potentially come from herd management software in the future. And then fairly recently, we also added an option for the user to provide the exact diet that they would like. And so here on the figure on the right just kind of illustrates that. So if you had, you knew you wanted to include these 5 feeds and that you wanted the inclusion rate for these 5 feeds to be average at a certain amount, and then with an acceptable bounds of inclusion, acceptable bounds around that inclusion rate, then we can provide that directly to the optimization method as additional constraint, and essentially formulate an exact diet instead of letting the optimization methods solve for the least cost diet, which can result in some somewhat unrealistic diets. So really the inputs that we're looking for to be pulled into the Rufus model that would inform this dairy cattle feeding process would include information about herd demographics, milk production, as well as the feeding groups and feeds and diets that are available for those animals. So to illustrate this a little bit more of where these data types might come from, I'm going to share my understanding of the dairy cattle feeding process. This is, again, not necessarily exactly how it happens on every farm, but in general, there is some sort of diet formulation software that is used to develop the diet recipe. That diet recipe usually in the units of the kilograms of each feed that is fed to kilograms of each feed per cow is passed to the feed mixing and delivery software. This feed mixing and delivery software also requires information about the dry matter content of those feeds, so it can be translated into the as fed or the mass of that feed, including the moisture that will need to be added to the diet. So that can come from a feed analysis report. A lot of times farms are testing are updating the dry matters on a regular basis, as often as daily on farms, by doing a dry matter analysis right there at their feed management center. Or it can come from a feed analysis report or even a standard feed library. These feed analysis reports are also needed to feed into the diet formulation software. Then, of course, there's the herd management software that I keep referencing. And so the information about the specific animals that is needed to estimate the nutrient requirements is fed directly into the diet formulation software. But the feed mixing and delivery software also needs to know how many animals are in the pen that will be receiving the diet. And so that information is critical for the feed mixing and delivery software. I just want to note that not all farms have this feed mixing and delivery software. Some of this is still done on more or less manual basis. And so then the information from of the diet recipe, the dry matter, and the number of cows is integrated to produce the pen diet recipe, which is the kilograms of each feed on an as-fed basis that is needed by each pen. And that information is used in order to put the right amount of feed into these TMR mixers so that it can then be delivered to the pens for the cows to eat. And then in ideal situations, whatever remains of the feed is collected and weighed so that we know how much was not eaten by each pen, and that information can be sent back to the feed mixing delivery software and potentially to the diet formulation software. And so in order to help to work towards this increasing the integration of data that's collected at the CAST with the Rufus model, we're going to start with information from this herd management software, and specifically this animal production information, mostly because there's my colleague, Dr. Giordano, has also made some great progress in this area, and there's already data streams that are being collected, integrated, and cleaned at the CAST. However, if we really want to make progress towards being able to pull in information that informs this whole dairy cattle feeding process, we will really need to focus on other parts of this process, including being able to pull in reports of the diet recipe from diet formulation software, feed analysis reports that can come from a variety of labs and in a variety of formats, usually just a PDF file, as well as information from this feed mixing software, especially if, for example, the dry matter contents are updated on a more regular basis than the feed analysis reports, which might only be on a monthly basis. And then the last piece that we would focus on is information about these feed mixtures that might have more specific information about the actual amount of feed that was delivered to the pens and the refusals that were collected. So coming towards the end of my the presentation part, and so just to sum things up, hopefully I present this as a use case for agricultural data, where we are working towards improving the use of our research centers, agricultural research centers here at Cornell, so that they can continue to function as advanced research sites, but also make that transition so that it is functioning as a technological test bed and education site to promote advancement and education in digital agriculture. And of course, the Rufus model is this whole farm simulation model that is capable of providing holistic estimates of environmental footprints, and has been built with high levels of coding and software standards to support this integration, data integration and interoperability. And so we believe that by integrating these two digital platforms, we can increase our understanding of the impacts of the research and technology that are being studied at the CAS on both short and long-term environmental outcomes, and so that we can more fully understand the potential benefits or unintended consequences. And so our immediate focus and interests, or my immediate focus and interests right now, are to work on these barriers to data interoperability related to dairy cattle feeding, in part because it's an existing gap, but also because any dairy producer or nutritionist will know that dairy feeds and feeding is one of the most important things to consider, both for dairy cattle production as well as the environmental impacts. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening. And I want to close with saying that both of these projects, so the CAST and the ruminant farm system model, really rely on stakeholder participation, and I emphasize this concept of participatory development that relies on involvement and input from stakeholders in all parts of the project. And that includes from the initial conceptualization to implementation and reporting. And so if anyone out there sees this and is interested in joining and providing input, feedback for either the CAS or the Rufus model, please reach out to me and let me know. And with that, I'd love to take any questions.
That was really great, Kristen. Thank you.
Thanks, Scout.
Well, while we're waiting for people to formulate their questions, I was just thinking there's so much, behind the scenes of what you're doing related to how the data is prepared and data interoperability. And you gave a little clue to it near the end when you were talking about getting those feed analysis reports from labs in PDF. And I've been thinking a lot about, I'm a research data librarian, and so I encourage people to be really conscientious about the kind of documentation they gather with their data and the things that they need in order to make their data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is a really long comment that's going to just get to probably a pretty straightforward question, but it's, I envision with linked data and the technologies that are being developed, the infrastructures that are being developed around FAIR data, that there would be a time when actually your that lab would push that to you via API or something like that. And so all of this is just, I guess, trying to prompt you to say more about these kinds of interoperability issues and the behind the scenes work that you have to do to bring all of this in. So I'm envisioning that you have to manually input the information on the PDF and so on. So if you can just talk about that for a minute, I'd love to know more.
Yeah, well, yes, there is right now certainly a lot of data entry that is extremely manual and tedious, including, historical management records that are still in like written notebooks and things like that we're trying to improve the data preservation for. Certainly, moving forward, we are working on developing methods that can, scrape data from lab reports that are at least standardized. Their format is standardized enough that we can create some sort of a script to pull that data in. But the real the real goal is to work towards something that is more automated, so that, as you said, they could we could have an API that either we could pull from or they could push to our database. And so some of the behind the scenes work that I've only recently started to involve myself in is by joining the Ag Gateway group that you heard from last month, and they have launched a dairy cattle feeding working group, and I'm super excited about what might come out of that. But in order for something like that to be effective, right, we would certainly need participation of a lot of the feed analysis laboratories, for example, because they would need to commit to the upholding the data standards and making that data accessible in a format that would be useful for the various players. So I'm still learning about how that process is going to play out, but I think it certainly requires the willingness and collaboration from a lot of different parties, in addition to a lot of bright technical people that are able to help write the code and design the systems that will enable these different platforms to talk to each other.
Thank you. I guess folks can just unmute themselves or raise their hand or put a question in chat.
Yeah, I had a question. Kristen, great presentation. I had a question about you've talked about the importance of the stakeholder participation, and I'm wondering how you got stakeholders involved, like from the beginning of the project, and sort of how the project interacts with them, or kind of takes takes guidance from them, because stakeholders can all have different objectives or different things that they want to see from the project. And so I'm just curious about when this Rufus was being developed, or with CAS, like how do you do the engagement with stakeholders?
Yeah, so it's definitely an evolving process. We're always trying to improve how we're doing it. From the Rufus side, we had stakeholders from, for example, Dairy Management Inc., which is a national dairy organization, and actually a couple of really willing and generous dairy farmers at the meetings when we were talking about well, one, do we need a new environmental footprinting model? And if we did, what would it look like? What would it be able to do? And so we really kind of just had so almost quarterly conversations with a group of people for over a year before we even kind of formalize the Rufus project as a whole. And then since then, we've developed a formal industry advisory council, and we try to have groups of we've thought through the different types of stakeholders that we have, and from farmers to NGOs to government to food processors, and make sure that we have representation on our council from all of those different categories. And then we have a newsletter to provide updates, and we invite them to our annual meeting. And actually the in-person annual meeting has been my favorite place to actually get feedback from the stakeholders, because even as wonderful as Zoom is for collecting, for communications and conversations, once you have that in-person discussion, you get a little bit more attention and focus, and have been able to gather some really great ideas. We also host, so like one of the better ways that we do get information back from our stakeholders is hosting focused discussions. For example, with the collaboration with FarmES, they have hosted I think it's bi-monthly working group to understand, what scenarios they might want to use or use the model to understand. So when I say scenarios, like they're going to use the model certainly to footprint their existing practices, but if you change this management practice, how would that impact your footprint? And so we worked through each of the different modules on the farm and provided a list of things we think that they might be interested in, but a lot of times we got feedback that what we thought they might be interested was not exactly what they were looking for. So I think if I could summarize it would be involving them in the initial discussions about what is this project, do we need it, and then doing your best to keep people informed of model progress, because even, for example, sometimes on those updates we get an email response that like, oh, this is really exciting, and sometimes it's why did you do this? This is why did you go down this path? It's overly complicated and not useful, as well as making a point to have in-person events, and then those more focused discussion sessions. And being humble so that you can accept the feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. The Rufus model, is that something that's like generally available to the public, like so people can try it or run it, or
so close.
so close.
We will be publishing it on an open source GitHub repository. And so at first that will just be the back end of the model. But if you are familiar enough with Python and can follow our detailed instructions, and I'll say that I learned Python on this project, so I feel pretty confident that anyone that's willing to sit down for a couple of hours could run it. But the next steps in our project will be to develop a user interface. The FarmES is making their own user interface, so it will be available in that platform. Yeah, after publishing the back end, we'll work on a user interface that will probably be targeted at a research user.
Right. Um, and I don't, I'm going to expose my ignorance to dairy farming. You showed this model for feed formulation, and it seems like formulating feed can be pretty complicated. I didn't appreciate that feed formulation for dairy could be pretty complicated. So could you kind of describe like how dairy farmers currently do that? Right? Do they have to formulate it like on the farm? But I mean, sort of how it works.
Yeah, so it really is. I mean, my colleague, two doors down has, been developing a nutrition model called the Cornell Net Carbohydrate and Protein System that is probably the method that most, or the underlying model that most farms in practice use through a variety of proprietary software. So he's made a whole career of this diet, dairy cattle diet formulation, and the way that it would work in practice for most farms is that they would have a nutritionist consultant, like they would hire either a consultant group or an individual that would be responsible for formulating their diet. And so that nutritionist would come out, they would talk to the herd managers, they would probably do a walk of the farm, and understand their feeding practices, which feeds they're growing on farm, which ones they're importing. They would collect all of they would collect samples of the feed, most likely send them to labs to get the nutrition composition of the individual feeds. And then that nutritionist doesn't have to be on farm. They would be, at their computer somewhere, would formulate sets of diets, right? Because it's not just one diet, it's multiple groups for their animals, and then send that to whoever is in charge of the feeding management at the farm. And those reports again come in a variety of formats, and it is dependent on the rest of the farm system as to whether or not that report can be has to be manually entered into feed mixing software or can be imported directly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps. And then I was curious about the pressure, if there's any pressure on reformulating feed to try to reduce the climate impacts from dairy farming.
Yeah, there certainly is pressure. I think in practice, or so I think a lot of the pressure now is coming from the processors or whoever is buying their milk, is to demonstrate that they have climate friendly milk supply shed. Of course, a lot of farmers are interested in being environmental stewards anyway, right?
Right.
And then there's the one of the things where it the pressure aligns with their current practices is that reducing the footprint also, or the emissions also, tends to align with feed efficiency in general.
Yeah.
And so that is certainly something that's been going on for a long time, but there's additional technologies, for example, novel supplements, things that can be added to the diet that alter the rumen environment or increase feed efficiency. And so there's a lot of pressure and interest in using these supplements, but for most of the supplements, our understanding of those impacts are not quite there. So there's very few supplements that are really well established in terms of being effective, especially over a long term, for reducing methane emissions, for example.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Well, this is fantastic. So, Kristen, what we'll do is we'll post the video on the project webpage so people can access. And if you have slides that you'd like to share, we can post those as well. And I really appreciate your taking the time to present this. This is all really cool stuff. And it's super exciting. So, all right. Well, everyone have a wonderful Thanksgiving and holiday season's right around the corner.
Mhm.
A little terrifying, but thank you very
Yeah.
much. I really appreciate your time, Kristen.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for the invitation, Jennifer. And yeah, have a great holiday. I'll pass on the slides right after
That would be
this.
fantastic.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.